Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, die-in time is here. That's right, it's Minisode time on Kill by Kill. Greetings and salutations, Internet. It's your old pal Patrick Hamilton coming to you once again from Hamilton High, or at least that's where we're going to end up. This is the Kill by Kill podcast, where we're dedicated to celebrating the least discussed component of any horror film, the characters. And today we are going to do a bit of preamble. We are going to come up next week on Prom Night 2, Hello Mary Lou. And before we do, our special guest for that first episode is actually in the studio with me, so I wanted to talk to him very quickly. The one and only Tyler MacIntyre. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for taking time to come on down here to the hinterlands of Long Beach to speak to me about a Canadian film that is not readily available on almost any media until a month and a half ago.
Yeah, I was very happy to see this one drop on Amazon. So, and I know a lot of Shudder people also are getting to see it. So it's exciting for me because I actually grew up in Alberta where this film was shot and went to school in Edmonton and had heard legend of it as someone who kind of, desired to make horror movies and was from that neck of the woods.
Sure. Now, I grew up locally up in Glendale. My junior high school ended up in a couple of films, Better Off Dead and Return to Horror High.
Cool. Return to Horror High is awesome.
Yes. So it's very weird to look at those films and disassociate my personal experience from that very fictional experience. So did you find that growing up where there were things, or that there were films that were happening, or television shows that filmed around where you grew up that...
Not really. I mean, like there's really not very much industry where I grew up. It's oil and gas and farming mostly where I'm from. But that said, there's a couple staples where you kind of realize as you're going, Unforgiven, for instance, shot about an hour south of where I grew up in just outside of Calgary. And then, down near where my mom lives, in kind of southern Alberta, there's they shot the Kansas stuff from Superman and Days of Heaven,
Sure. So
some pretty iconic, big fields and shit.
Lots of hands dipping into wheat.
Exactly. Yeah. It got so there, and then more recently there's been a lot more The Revenant and parts of Inception and things like that. And when I was in university, they shot the Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford in Edmonton. But I was nowhere near that whole industry, whereas it was more my speed to kind of be ooh, they shot, Prom Night 2 here. And this is where they store that negative. There was literally it was so lame. And I know they shot it at this high school there called Archbishop O'Leary, mostly. And then a lot of they look to me like they're buildings from the university where I went, University of Alberta. But beyond that, Edmonton really has two claims to fame in my mind, and one of them is this, and the other one is Ginger Snaps. So it's which is pretty good.
That is 2 for 2.
Totally
decent Canadian horror exploitation, as you were.
Yeah, exactly. It was 100% tax shelter stuff. Other than Ginger Snaps isn't, but
but excellent representations of low budget horror films. So let's talk about you a little bit in terms of how you got into this. The first thing that I saw from you landed on Netflix, and that was Patchwork.
Yeah. So Patchwork is my first feature, and so it's essentially it's a Frankenstein movie, but three women who go out partying one night and end up stitched together in the same body. And it's kind of a horror comedy, in the vein of Reanimator. And so the women have to kind of work together to find who did this to them and exact revenge. And so, we shot that in the end of 2014 and then into 2015. And then it played festivals for about a year and a half, and then eventually came out on last year. And people finally got to see it. And as soon as it drops on Netflix, it's on the shelf at Blockbuster, and people start telling me hey, you made a movie, and I guess start getting messages on Twitter from people from Ohio or wherever, and it's great. I'm glad that people are finally getting to check it out.
Now, was that an original thing from you and your writing partner, or did you come into that project with some semblance of this had been going around?
No, it was from. So I write with a gentleman named Chris Lee Hill, and so we've wrote our first two movies and possibly the next one together. And so I made a short film called Patchwork, which was a was 2 minutes long, which essentially is one of the scenes in the movie. Like I didn't use the same footage, but I essentially made a 2-minute short film that was about a female Frankenstein, and people were watching it and kind of reacting positively. Like it didn't really I didn't push it out to film festivals really. I just kind of showed it around as kind of a sort of preliminary pitch thing, and people were checking it out and being like, "Oh, like this is fun. Is there like a feature length script of this?" And I was like, "Yeah, there could be. I just need to make some tweaks." So we like went away for a month and then came back with a script we wrote together, and it just happened that Chris was in town, and we had always wanted to kind of write a feature that we could make kind of based on a specific scale, and so we sort of wrote to our constraints and things we knew we could get, and ended up with a feature length thing that we thought was a kind of a fun tone for us, and like I liked horror comedy too because it allowed us to essentially, if we wanted to pivot to a more straight horror movie or a sci-fi movie or more straight comedy, like no one would be surprised. Which I think is a little bit like if you do drama, like drama with a capital D, then that's like all you're going to do for like 10 years.
True. It shows range, but you're also on a tightrope. So with Patchwork in particular, you have the story of these 3 women. The reason they have come together is because they've all been murdered and they're essentially solving their own murder. But within that, you have the comedy tones and you have sci-fi tones. How do you decide? Is it something in the moment, or is this something you sort of discover 3 times? Once when you're writing, once when you're filming, once when you're editing, as far as how to know when you are in the specific zone of, people are going to get this tone?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've always had a very specific pulse on personally. I like movies that have kind of a strange tones or take large risks with tone. Like that's very exciting to me because it often means that you're watching something that isn't quite like other things. And so it is a challenge. I find it's really difficult to get tone across, like very specifically on the page. Like, and I don't think that's just a limit of us as writers, but I mean, like in general, I think people read a script and aren't 100% cognizant of what it could be, like on the screen. Mm-hmm. And so, and there's this also kind of double-edged sword of trying to pitch a horror comedy specifically, because there's a bit of there's a stigma against them in the industry, definitely on the sales side or in the financing side, because there's this myth that horror comedies don't make money, and it, like there's no real backup for that, by the way. Like it's just an arbitrary fucking thing that somebody said in the 80s.
I assume it comes from people spending too much money to make a horror comedy, not making enough money.
I mean, I guess, but like, some of my favorite things, like, American Werewolf in London,
right.
Fucking Shaun of the Dead, like, there's great examples, like even ones that are like, Juan of the Dead, like it's amazing, Tucker and Dale, like there's a lot of really great examples of horror comedy working well and making a lot of money. And especially like in the 80s and 90s, and as well as, all the way up until now. And I really do think that's actually kind of a myth. So more often than not, people will read a script, if it's a horror comedy script, and be like, "Hey, there's fucking jokes in here. Are you aware of that?" And they just they just don't get it. And you're just like, "Yes, I know." Like, and I'm using that, because horror and comedy are often, they're kind of two sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. And you can they really strengthen each other because you can build tension, and then you can have a scare or a piece of gore or something disgusting, and then you can use a laugh to kind of like reset the palate mm-hmm. and do it again. And that's important. And you'll see horror, use comedy, in all sorts of ways. And that's, I think you need that levity and you need that balance. And so like, if you can get past that hurdle and actually make it, then I find like my personal strategy is really just to shoot as much stuff as I can of not really a range of tones, but like if something feels like it's getting too silly, then I'll shoot something that's a little pulled back, or the opposite. If it's not silly enough, then we can, try and add something that has a little bit of levity to give yourself some out. And then in the editing room, I do much more balancing the tone because my background is also as an editor. So on a moment to moment basis, you can really figure out within each scene, where you are, and then just be very honest with yourself about how that's working. And that involves showing it to people and doing like test screenings and seeing like, oh, they kind of tuned out here. And like, how do I get this joke to land? Or how do I get this scare to land? And finding those little bits. And sometimes it's it's very micro changes, but giving yourself that runway and that, or like having the presence of mind to, build in that time and realize that you do need to work at it in order to get the balance to work. Is I think where a lot of projects kind of tend to fail because you you just kind of assume that like, well, I wrote this joke and it seemed funny on the page and we shot it this way and that's the way it's supposed to be in the edit.
Right.
And not really like having that extra check and balance for yourself.
So when we move over from Patchwork to Tragedy Girls. Now, what I found interesting about both films is they are weirdly, in some way, in one specific way, the flip side of the same coin. In Patchwork, you have three women who did not know one another at all, who have trouble making connections for various reasons, and are now bound together because of this one incident, and then have to find a way to forge a friendship and a way to work together when they're not really built to do that. On the flip side, you have Tragedy Girls, lifelong friends. They've always been tight, and there's this one thing that's driving them, and it allows them to push each other further and further and further. I don't want to give away the whole hog, but it is crazy how much it weirdly played off of one another when I watched them back to back. Where did you guys, was it a conscious decision to decide to play both of those ends of female friendships? And did you find a hurdle to that, being two guys from Canada necessarily?
Yeah, you're digging deep here. We definitely wanted to, because having just come off of Patchwork, like we were just finished the edit when we started writing Tragedy Girls. And so we wanted to, obviously explore like a different type of relationship. And I think it helps kind of, having like a, essentially, some thematic similarities, but again, like we wanted to, explore different types of relationships. And I really like, digging deep on friendships, like those are, pretty much the most like important relationships in my life. And so it was, really the anchor point for Tragedy Girls, like the idea that you don't need to get behind what these girls are doing. You don't need to get behind knowing what it's like to be a teenage girl. You can just need to identify with the idea of having a best friend, and then that is like the guiding light for us, and it allows us to kind of like once we get you to buy that relationship, I think we, part of the fun of the movie is trying to test that. And like, how far will you as an audience member go with us down this rabbit hole? Yeah. And if we can, and when they do go too far, like, like how does that make you feel? And that's part of like, what's interesting about it is like, we made this movie in like a context where, we were outside the system enough that, you could try something like that and we can go kind of dark places, and they, and then there was no one there to stop us. So, and that's again, like, like that's part of the advantage, or really the only advantage of making a movie like kind of on a smaller scale, is that you can take those risks without, people stopping you. And yeah, but I'm glad that you you seem to really have got a very specific watch of our movies in context, and there's not that many people I've talked to who have, so it's very enlightening for me.
It sparked the thought, and I at least wanted to know, because I think it was because I'd heard about Tragedy Girls much more than Patchwork, but then I had watched Patchwork so long ago, I wanted to refresh, so I put this in. It's going to make me laugh. I enjoy this movie. And flipping them back and forth was like, oh, there's a yin and a yang here. And that's one of those things where you pull from the universe. You're not entirely sure it's intentional, but it is really interesting. The other thing that sort of plays around in Tragedy Girls, and it's very different in terms of its time frame. In Scream, you have a pair of guys who are doing terrible things. But you're not, because of the framework of that film, you're not aware of what they're doing until the very end.
It's a whodunit, yeah.
Yes. Tragedy Girls is not inherently starting out to be a whodunit. That gets threaded in along the way. And I was like, this is like a way of doing Scream from those two guys' point of view, and yet it retains all the humor of Scream. It retains some of the delicious meanness of it. There's biting moments, but you also don't hate them, which is, again, that very tough balancing act. So did you know that was happening in the moment? Were you able to was there a moment when you were filming that where you're like, oh, I think we're on the right track here?
Yeah, I mean, I knew at the end of the day, like I could write the script any way I wanted, but it was going to come down to those two actors,
Sure.
and so I had my hopes, like we made some very specific lists, and we actually worked with the same casting directors from Scream, actually, Lisa Beach and Sarah Katzman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, who were wonderful. But we knew we wanted to build this ensemble, but it's really just about the girls, and so I ended up making these lists and ended up with these two actors that we knew kind of knew each other because they were both in Marvel movies previously,
Right.
and they'd done press together and gone to Comic-Con and stuff. And so I ended up meeting with Alex, who plays Michaela, first, and so we just went to the 101 Cafe and kind of sat down, and she's like, I just gave her Brianna's house, and we did a table read, and it was awesome. And so like they really took like like they invested themselves in the part, and they lived together while we were shooting it. So like I knew that chemistry was going to be there, and they both wanted parts that they could really make their own. And so, but it wasn't until like a rehearsal when I started to kind of like getting the scenes on their feet and finding that rhythm between them, that I'm like, oh, I could watch these girls forever. And then I was like, that's key, because like as long as I can make that relationship work and that you're rooting for that, then I knew that we could push it, one way or the other. And then the rest of the time it was just kind of, tonally trying to throw a fastball through the whole size of a grapefruit or something, like just like hoping that the people would tune into it.
It's really nice to also watch a movie about young people that does deal with social media, but does not make the entire point of the presentation about the evils of social media. Like, we all get it. Not everything has to be Black Mirror. I love Black Mirror, but I don't want it 24/7. So was that something that you guys worked out in terms of how you wanted to approach this, or did you find it along the way? Because you understand their mania, but it's never really about them achieving this very ephemeral social media cachet. It's more about, these are the things that they wanted together, and the closer they get to it, they do find that the reason they wanted to go there and the things that have gotten them there start to pull them apart.
Yeah, definitely. And we were pretty conscious of, like we didn't want to present like an answer, because like I think social media is still very much evolving, like and I think we point very directly at that, social media has a way of kind of disassociating us from like real world violence and suffering. And there's an element of just being aware of that. But that said, like we don't, like it's an ongoing thing. And so we thought that'd be okay to kind of, point at that thematically and satirically, really. But knowing that we weren't going to present any like a Black Mirror style, like we got to pump the brakes on this, that we kind of had to play another angle, and when that's where kind of the friendship stuff came in.
Well, I think it really works out beautifully. And now in terms of its rollout, it had a theatrical element that went to it. Now it's available on VOD. Is it going to land in one specific place anytime soon?
Yeah, it's on all VOD platforms right now. iTunes, Amazon, wherever you do pay VOD stuff. It's going to hit Hulu soon, I believe next month.
Okay.
And so anyone who has that SVOD platform, which I'd encourage you to get because they have plenty of great content.
Yes.
It'll be there for the next year or so, and then on to other pastures.
All right, excellent. Well, I would encourage everyone. I went and paid for it happily. I wanted to buy a ticket to it, but it just it just came up snake eyes for me on that. But as soon as it came up, I'm like, oh, thank God it's here, and I can watch it right away. And I thought it was well worth the trip. The people that you're able to bring into it, they don't feel like they're dropped out of outer space. The guest stars, if you were, I sometimes feel like you get an actor for 2-3 days, maybe get them for 24 hours, and it can feel like they're from outer space. But no one in there feels like they didn't get the tone of what you were going for, or they weren't just naturally inclined to it. It all flowed so well, and it just felt cinematic on top of it, which I thought was a real accomplishment.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're very fortunate with a lot of our cast members, and Craig, Josh, Kevin Durant, like everyone really kind of snapped into the vibe of it, and once they stepped on set, and it allowed us to do a lot for our size.
All right, excellent. Well, folks, right out there right now, we have Patchwork on Netflix. We have Tragedy Girls available on VOD. Thanks so much for stopping by. And of course, next week, folks, we're the Cult of Mary Lou. It's no longer just growing. It's here. We're going to dive into it for the first 2 kills of Prom Night 2. So until then, for myself and for Tyler, bye-bye, everybody.
Plane. Holding for plane.
It's only going to get louder.
Yeah, it's like shooting in LA. We are kind of in LA.
It's LA County. It's as far as I could go and convince people I still worked in the industry. Because when we told people we're moving to Long Beach, they're like, "Oh, are you leaving the industry?" Like, no,
I'm so sorry. What happened?
Yeah, I'm like, no, it's still LA County. Just because I didn't go to the hinterlands of the valley does not mean that I'm not in LA County. I'm still paying industry tax, an absurd amount of money for a very small house.
Ah.